Hello, John again. This time I got my little review going for the HBO series, His Dark Materials. I was planning on actually setting this up a little bit better, but I am now covered in my Babby Monsters, so this is what it's going to be. So I was super looking forward to this because, as other things, and I've mentioned before, and I have no doubt I'll mention again, I'm a massive book nerd about certain things, including his Dark Materials. I remember reading the three books in that, and then immediate and crying pretty heavily at the end. Immediately listening to the audiobook afterwards, and then crying at the end of that too. I've also read, Lyra's Oxford, Once Upon a Time in the North. I got Book of Dust like the week it came out. Was it a little over 2 years ago or whatever it is? And I remember seeing the movie in the theater and for Golden Compass, and being disappointed by it. And one of the reasons I was disappointed by that was the same reason, like stuff like Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire didn't work out well, is because it was like the cliff notes of the actual book. It just went through it so fast without really kind of delving that it kind of just really seemed like, well, this is almost a waste of time, just really disappointing. The problem is the Golden Compass movie um, felt a little more like the books, and the cast was fucking spot on. The girl that got to play Lyra was perfect. I think Nicole Kidman did a really good job as Mrs. Coulter. Daniel Craig, like everyone in it was really good. And if you have read the books, you can't not see Sam Elliott as Lee Scoresby. You read the books, Sam Elliott is Lee Scoresby. There's no other choice for him. It's just dead on perfect for that. I don't know if Philip Pullman was like, I had it in my head that he's kind of a, Sam Elliott type, and I just sort of wrote it. I don't know, but he's Lee Score as dead on. So, having been disappointed in the movie, although I did actually watch it several more times after that, just kind of got the feeling for it. And I've read the trilogy a couple of times now. Was really excited to see that the BBC was going to be doing a Dark Materials series, and the fact that they were calling the series as Dark Materials kind of gave me hope because it's, oh, okay, you are you're calling it the name of the actual book series. It's the difference of calling the show Game of Thrones versus calling it A Song of Ice and Fire, because the book series is called A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not called Game of Thrones. It's just the first book. So they actually named the series after the series, and it was BBC, and actually have a series. So it felt like, oh, okay, we can flesh this out a little bit and do something a little better for a little closer to the books, a little bit more honest to the material. I started seeing some of the cast, and I was kind of like, I don't know, like you're kind of not, you're casting people that don't seem to fit right for the people with whom you're casting, and but I was like, all right, just shut up. They know what they're doing. Just watch the stupid show. Just shut up and watch the show. Um, on that note, the I took a little while to wait because I don't have HBO. I don't really have cable, but I sort of did the free trial because I wanted to watch it. I waited till it was all out, and I knew there's several other people who I know who have seen it, the show for Dark Materials, and really liked it. Thought it was really well done. They liked some of the people in it from other things that I didn't really know. And so I was like, okay, let's pull the trigger on us. Let's just do that. And a couple of people have said it starts a little slow and then it really takes off. So I was kind of expecting, okay, don't just watch the damn show. I purposely did not reread the books in order to try and treat the show fairly as a show itself, as opposed to let me just nitpick, the juxtaposition between book and show every step of the way. I didn't want to do that. I kind of wanted just to kind of take the show on its own. That being said, on a general note, as a show in and of itself, it was pretty good. Didn't blow me away, but it was a good show. In terms of it being more purely his Dark Materials than a movie, I gotta say no, it wasn't. And part of it a little bit is, I'm sorry, baby, I gotta move. You guys are killing me. My hand hurts like hell. Um, it didn't have the feel of the books. It didn't feel like the books. It didn't even, the movie kind of, you could feel into the books a little bit more from the movie than the show. Um, that being, but I'm going to kind of go back and forth. So just deal with the Gemini energy coming at you of dealing with this and that and kind of bouncing back and forth. It's just the way it's going to be. So the cast I didn't think was extraordinarily accurate to the books, but they did a good job. My biggest thing, I mentioned Lee Scoresby was Sam Elliott in the movies, perfect casting. Lin-Manuel Miranda was Lee Scoresby in the show, and with the way they portrayed Lee Scoresby in the show, he did a really good job. I think he's a really good actor. He's immensely talented in a lot of things. Um, and for the show version of Lee Scoresby, I thought he did pretty darn well. He was likable. It kind of borderline went over the top a little bit. Like they made him kind of try too hard to be. It was a little try hard to be both cheeky and a little bit scoundrelly, but heart of gold too. It's like they kind of tried too hard for that, and it felt forced. But I still think he did a good job with what he had. I think everyone in it did a good job for what they had. I just think the show in general really fell through in a lot of ways. Like there was a lot of stuff where, I mean, on a technical note, like the main technical note I'll have is that the editing seemed off. Like there was stuff like you see the one guy like coming out of a one of the holes and he's walking down the street. It's like 3 seconds and then you cut to something else. It was completely unnecessary. Completely unnecessary. And there was several scenes throughout the series that were just sort of like set up things that were throwaway and unnecessary, or could have easily been put into leading up to the scene that they were kind of leading up to, but they interspersed it differently. So, on a technical note, some of their editing was crap, and some of their continuity choices were really like it was just jarring, but not jarring into oh, this is supposed to make you jarred to get you to feel something. It's just jarring into you screwed up how you set the show up. So there are a few things like that. Um, there were a couple nitpicky things that I had too in terms of, and this is where the book snob thing comes back with Lyra. Um, the big thing with the books and everything is that she's a liar. Like she lies like all the damn time. And I didn't think she lied that much in the show. There were times where, okay, yeah, she kind of did here or there, but it wasn't like there was this driving thing where she kind of just said stuff to say stuff. I mean, she was more of a sort of traditional Western this is unfair and I will fight for this sort of thing than she was. It was, being like really kind of cheeky and making stuff up just kind of because she can. Like she was still chaotic, but there was that whole, I mean, that's the reason her fucking name is Lyra. That's the reason why she got the alethiometer, the truth-telling machine, is because that's like the major sort of theme with her character was lies and truth. She was lied to her about her parentage. She's lied about, she gets told lies about like her purpose and all this other stuff. she spins all these yarns and all this over the thing. So later on in the show, when the actual whole point of the story revolves around some of the bullshit she says, it's sort of like, oh, well, I guess now she's an accomplished liar that can fool people because it wasn't set up well before that. And another thing with her is that in the book, and they even did this in the movie, where she's playing with the alethiometer when she first gets it. She's messing with the dials, and she can see the 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 quick hand that's telling her what to do is still moving. So she's getting her answers, and she's working it out on a slower pace. In the show, they had it where she can't read it, can't read it, can't read it. Gets kind of told one thing, and all of a sudden, bam! Suddenly, she can read it, and she understands it. Instead of like this slow thing where she's working with it, it's working with her, and it's kind of pulling the meaning out. She can just now read it. And again, that's what it seemed to me, because it was like she was coming up against struggling, gets told about it a little bit, and all of a sudden can do it. And it kind of bugged me. It was like, I don't know if that's maybe just can go back into being one of the technical aspects of the show that just wasn't told well. Um, but that's one of the things that kind of bugged me. It was like all of a sudden now she not only can she read it, she can read it with a huge amount of proficiency. The learning curve was zoop, as opposed to the books and the movies where she kind of keeps working at it a little bit. Um, Now I understand. I got just stuff in my eyes like all damn day. Now, all that being said, talking about it technically again, I understand that there are changes that are going to have to be made in order to translate something from one media to another. I understand that, and again, that's one of the reasons why I didn't read the books, because I just want to judge the show on its own. So I understand that some of these changes might have needed to take place in order to make the show a show. Um, and there were some things, it seemed like some of the changes they made, just like little bits with scene or dialogue, was there to explain things the way would be helpful to have explained for a show. Instead of just info dumping, we're going to explain this through dialogue and action. All right, great. They're setting up Will Perry now in the first season, even though he doesn't come into the second until you don't see him until the second book at all. But they're kind of setting up some of his journey, and it um, I can't remember exactly, but it seemed like they really added this whole huge other thing. Like one of the Magisterium people goes back and forth between our world and their world, and he knows how to drive cars and use mobile phones and knows about like the internet. He's hiring all these people to do all this other stuff. So, I mean, again, those are changes that you make to set up a series. So I can kind of understand that. Bugged me a little bit. There's some stuff I'm like, I don't remember this. I don't remember that. But it was set up for stuff that's going to be important later on in the series. I'm like, okay. But that being said, there were still weird times where they had sort of info dumping stuff. It was weird. It was like, all right, I understand this just change that you make for a show. Okay, but you did all this. It's like you set up these scenes to explain in a way that you do with, again, dialogue and action, but then there's other stuff where it's just info dump. It just jarred me sometimes. There's some stuff I get kind of sucked in, and then something would happen, and I'd be like, the fuck? Like, what? Okay. Um, but one of the things that confused me about it is that there are ways that there are some of these things, and there was more than one or two things, so it's hard for me to pick out one thing. And again, it's been a while since I've read the books, but it seemed like in the books, a little bit even in the movie, there were some things that were described or brought in one way that they just changed in the show, that they still described it or brought it out through dialogue and action, but there was a better way to do it. It's like they reinvented the wheel of the thing. It was almost like there were some things that this show was inspired by his Dark Materials, but wasn't an adaptation of it because the way it was described in other things didn't need to be changed, but it was. So it was kind of like, okay, I get it, but why? There was a lot of kind of that I felt through the show. Um, I don't. Yeah, again, like the feel of it was off too. Like it didn't feel, the whole thing of it. And not even I'm not even talking about the parts that took place in what's supposed to be like our sort of real world. Even the parts that are in like Lyra's universe and everything didn't feel right. There was a feeling the books had, even the movie had, where it was sort of like it felt a little different. It felt maybe a little fantastical. It felt like maybe even like if you watch like maybe like the old Poirot episodes with David Suchet, where it was like, oh, this felt like that time. It didn't feel like another time. It didn't feel like another place. It was just sort of huh, sort of thing. And I think that's part of the things that kind of stopped me from really getting sucked into it. It didn't feel right. And some of that might just because, okay, Lyra in this is brown hair instead of blonde. Like Mrs. Coulter also has brown hair instead of blonde. All this other, it's like these little differences that stuff. It's almost like, I remember reading something where Neil Gaiman was talking about this. It was, you know, uh, having things, kind of be true to source material in certain ways just makes it better. Like having John Constantine be blonde with a beige trench coat just feels more right than having him with dark hair and a black trench coat. So it's just little stuff like that just doesn't feel right. And there's a whole scene that they didn't have where Mrs. Coulter's monkey finds the alethiometer, and then there's a whole thing with like a whole conflict with that wasn't even in there at all. So there's almost stuff, even though we have an 8 episode series, and yes, they expanded this by having stuff from leading into things from the second book. So they added all this stuff, but they still cut things like that out, which bugged me. And there were some other things. There was little bits of uh, certain people that bugged me too, like Ma Costa, the Egyptian sort of mom who takes Lyra in, and her son is one of the ones that gets captured and all this. It was almost like she should just pretty much be, the book had this, the movie had this, for Golden Compass had this, where she was, a dark-haired, olive-skinned Molly Weasley. This like don't you touch her, you bitch, and I'll fight for this and everything. But she was super sweet and everything. But in the show, again, blonde white lady, and I didn't really like her. I mean, she was kind of like a bitch a lot of times, and for like no reason. And then she kind of softened up and was a little bit more sort of like, oh, it's a little bit better. But then they kind of just had her almost just kind of be tough to be tough sort of thing too. It's like I do the diversity in this was better than the movie and some other things. It wasn't just sort of like, oh, well, everyone's sort of white, but the Egyptians have olive skin and dark hair, and then the people guarding the Siberian thing, have a look too. So it wasn't almost as segregated. The Egyptians were a much more diverse group of people. Um, and Will Perry is mixed as well and everything. So the diversity uh, is fine. And it did not feel like some things, like sometimes there's times in Doctor Who, for example, speaking just BBC stuff, where it's like they try too hard to force certain diversities in, and it's almost sometimes Doctor Who almost gets the your privilege is showing badge. It didn't feel like this, but it did feel like the characterization of someone like Ma Costume was just wrong. And almost like Lee Scoresby, where the actor did a good job with what they had, but it wasn't true to the book or even the movie. They did something completely different with it. They almost made these characters completely different people. And I think in Ma Costa's case, not for the better, because you didn't get that Molly Weasley sort of feel to her, where you were, as soon as you got her, you were like, I know I feel safe with her, and I'm just reading the damn book or watching the movie or something like that. I didn't like her most of the time that she was on there. Like I didn't, you know. Some of the things I thought were kind of accurate was still Serafina Pekkala. I don't remember seeing this actress before or anything, but she was sufficiently sort of, I don't want to say aloof, but she had this poise and elegance and regalness that you could say, okay, yes, I could see this person either having power I don't, or being much, much older, a few hundred years old or whatever like that, or both. Like I could understand this woman having power and being able to sort of, parallel someone like Eva Green, for God's sakes, with that and still come off good with it was, hey, good for her. You know, she looked the part. She had, she's a unique looking woman, awesome cheekbones, very attractive, regal, graceful, but still maybe a little bit dangerous, and was still able to walk that line between seeming cold but caring and knowing and powerful and stuff. And again, I mean, to try and step into an obvious comparison to someone like Ava Green, I think she did a really good job. So some stuff like that was really well done. Like, okay, that made sense. Uh, but honestly, it was disappointing as well. But in different, the show as a whole, the show was disappointing. This first season at least, because I do hope that they finish the books with the show. I will continue watching it. It wasn't like this is crap and I'm not watching this anymore. Like I'm done, whatever. I did kind of drag myself through finish watching it. I didn't watch it with the gusto that I had thought I would have had. I didn't have the gusto after even 3, 4 episodes that, even expecting it to go slowly, I thought I would have. I hoped that I would get sucked in. And I think maybe, and it's quite possible that I had built it up so much, like I was looking forward to it so much and had certain expectations for it, that it just didn't happen. It didn't flat out meet my expectations, and maybe I just wanted it so bad to be a certain way that what we got and the difference between those two things was too kind of great of a chasm to have. And that's possible. Like, to be fair, my sort of nerd bias might be showing with that. And that's probably accurate. But it just, yeah, just little stuff like Ma Costa not being right, Lee Scoresby being a very different person. Again, no front on Lin-Manuel Miranda. He did a great job, but he was just a different person. You might as well not even have him called Lee Scoresby anymore. I didn't like Yorick's voice. And I know it's hard to compare to Ian fucking McKellen, Sir Ian McKellen. I know you can't really compare that, and since they didn't get some of that caliber, which I thought would be interesting if they got like Patrick Stewart, like that. Oh, you have Ian McKellen here and Patrick Stewart there, Sir Patrick Stewart. Like that would have been interesting, but he just seemed. I didn't know what accent he was going for. Was he trying to go for some sort of Viking-y accent, or was he just stuffy? And he didn't have the resonance of being a bear. I think that um, Peter, was it Serafanovitz or something like that, I think was Ifor Ragnarsson. And that was more of a bear voice. It's almost like they needed to swap. Like the guy who was I4 needed to be Yorick, and Yorick's needed to be I4, and that would have made more sense. Like I would have that would have felt better. And then little things like their armor didn't look right. The armor looked like super chunky and whatever, and this is supposed to be almost like their like katana for them, like it's part, or like their demon for these other people. It's part of their soul, it's part of their spirit, and it just sort of looked like these chunky, almost rocky, like bleh, like whatever. I didn't. Even the fight with the bears was sort of like, oh, this is okay. It's kind of a fight with CG bears. But then some of the way certain things were filmed where you didn't really see kind of who won until turned around because Lyra was kind of blocking it. And there were certain things they did with the actual photography, following Lyra in certain ways, that made it like, ooh, kind of what happened. But then they did it a couple of times, especially at the end in Big Battle Things, where it seemed less like, ooh, what happened? And oh, build suspense. It seemed less like they were building suspense and more like they were saving CGI money. That's just the way it looked. There were a few times. I think because they did the same trick several times, it stopped looking like a neat thing and started looking like we need to save money. It'd be like if the Netflix Daredevil show, instead of having one fight per season, that's one contiguous take. If they did one fight per every other episode, that was like that because they just ran out of time or something like that. It seemed like they were covering up things a little bit. I will say, um, I mean, I did like Daniel Craig as Lord Asriel. I think he kind of fit that. I think James McAvoy did a good job with that. And as a side note, a little aside, super jealous of his hair. I don't know, there's something about like his hair looked really nice in this. I don't know. I was super jealous of his hair. Um, the woman who was Mrs. Coulter, I think she wasn't really Mrs. Coulter from like the books where there was that kind of cold, really sweet, you could understand how she's able to kind of finagle power because it's almost like a beautiful snake going into things. This was like, I had a friend of mine who was telling me about it. It was like she was more of a psychopath, where she was very cold and very cutting. And she was kind of sweet, but it seemed like at the same time with it. And then there were times where the rage erupted. So the actress did an amazing job at it. Just kind of wasn't accurate to the books. She still seemed very dangerous, very intelligent and everything, but it just didn't have the same sort of like as like the book or Nicole Kidman did. So again, good job by the actress, different characterization. Okay. And again, I understand you're not trying to just ape. Maybe some of this was a way to clearly define themselves away from the movie. They didn't want to have people think that this show is just rebooting from the movie that didn't do well, that wasn't as good as it could have been. despite having all the advantages that the movie did. Maybe, maybe, and some of this could have just been from that, or it could just sort of be. I recognized a couple director names from like Sherlock and Doctor Who and stuff like that. So maybe they've got that sort of Stephen Moffat sort of vibe where we know better about this. We're purposely gonna throw you a curveball to subvert your expectations, and we really know better how this should be. Because as much as I like Sherlock, there's a lot of places and times where it's not Sherlock Holmes. you know. And I'm sorry, Stephen Moffat, as someone who actually works in mental health, your Sherlock is not a sociopath. He's not. He's on the spectrum, not a sociopath. He's not a personality disorder. Sorry, you're wrong. As much as you want to try and make it interesting that I'm a sociopath, no, he's not. Um, and then the Dracula show, the different changes with that, and oh, we're going to try and be shocking and try and change things in these sort of ways and subvert your expectations. Okay, very few times are things. It goes into some of the problems that I have with reboots. Because a lot of times, we don't need a reboot. We don't need, as much as I love Tom Holland as Spider Man, how many more fucking Spider Man reboots do we need? How many more Fantastic fucking Four reboots do we need? None, because the Fantastic Four aren't that good. Anyway, but all these things want to reboot this, new Blade, new this, new that. Fuck that. My point is, how many, and I'm not just saying this as someone who's been trying to get their goddamn book published for 4 or 5 years. I'm saying it as someone who is sick and tired of seeing reboots. There are indigenous people all over the world, people of color, LGBTQ plus people, all these other stories that have been marginalized, ignored, forgotten, or patently just said fuck off because they weren't this narrow thing of stuff that sells. But then now we do get things that are okay, we're going to try and take this thing, as Dark Materials or Dracula or Sherlock Holmes or something, and we're going to adapt it, but we know better, so we're going to adapt it different. At that point in time, just do something original. If you're going to adapt something, but you're going to change it so dramatically because you want to be interesting or subvert expectations or you know better or any of this other stuff, just make something original. Stop aping other stuff. If you've got all these ideas of how something cool could be, make something new. Make something original. Don't take something that is already established in a thing and think that you know better how to do it. It's some of my views on like aesthetics and art and movie and things like this. And one of the things that sort of pissed me off about like some of the way George Lucas treated even Star Wars, in the prequels and the way he had control over what's now Legends or the expanded universe, like the books and all this other stuff, was because he took the thing that was there before, put it out, so it's kind of no longer his, and then changed it. Anyway, to go back, the thing I was going to say my aesthetics were sort of formed by was I had this feeling anyway, but like it kind of was given a framework when I read Picture of Dorian Gray when I was in high school, and in it they're talking about that idea of if you create a piece of art, a book, a movie. Again, movie's not going to be from Picture of Dorian Gray, but if you're talking, a painting, a sculpture, a movie, a TV show, a book, comic book, something like that, and you put it out there, and it gains an audience. To a certain extent, what you've already done on some level isn't yours anymore because other people are getting this relationship with it. Um, I'm not saying that now you have to go back and completely fan service the whole damn rest of your whole life to this thing if you plan on making a series, um, or multiple things of this, sequels or a series of books, or have this other stuff planned or anything like that. I'm not saying you don't have to fan service the whole thing. Tumblr should not rule your career. So long as, I mean, especially if you actually have a plan where something should go, as opposed to just half-assing it and being mad someone, stomped in your little toy box, then I'm going to make this better. Rise of Skywalker. J.J. Abrams. Um, so, you have that thing, but to a certain extent that's not yours anymore. So if you're going to take this other thing, again, Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, his dark materials, any of this other stuff, and you're going to adapt it and put this out there in this way to kind of expand it like that or anything, but then you change the things in these ways, why even do the thing? It's not like you're covering a song. Song covers have a thing where if your song cover is basically the original, why did you cover it to begin with? There's a cover of Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill. I don't know who the woman artist is who's covering it, but it's practically no different than the original, except Kate Bush's version is obviously going to be better. But there's no real difference. I mean, it still sounds like something from the 80s. It sounds like just a demo version of the other thing. Why even cover it at that point in time if you're going to just do the same thing? But that's a you're going across the same medium there. Who's a baby? As opposed to translating from page to screen in some sort. That's one of the positives, so to speak, of like some of these Marvel movies and everything. It's like they got these essential things from the character, and we can't put 40, 50, 60 years on there because even when this started, it was different. So we're going to try and keep this to the essence of the thing the best we can. And then as our series goes, based on the some of the changes and choices we make, then we can kind of change it. They kind of try to keep Thor this certain way, but then you have Chris Hemsworth did such a good job kind of making it funny, and Dark World kind of was the and all that. But hey, these other things worked when he did that. Let's run with that now. So then you have Thor Ragnarok, and then, Infinity War had kind of a good both, but then Endgame came out and they kind of ran with that, but did like the sad side of it too. So they did the essence and then did their own thing. Um, this is one of the reasons why, I mean, as again, going back to Sherlock, as much as I like Sherlock and Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman and Mark Addison, that I do like that show. To me, Jeremy Brett will still be the definitive Sherlock Holmes because the show where he was Sherlock Holmes was dead on the most perfect adaptation from page to screen of Sherlock Holmes you can make. Same thing with David Suchet as Poirot. That the series and then the later sort of like uh, sort of movie basically ones that they did with David Suchet as Hercule Poirot was as perfect a page to screen translation as you can get. Um, I have very fond memories of the Joan Hickson Miss Marple. Same sort of thing. Very close to page to screen adaptation. Some changes, again, stuff for time, some things might not work right. I understand. But they weren't trying to now make something completely different of it. I cannot bring myself to watch Kenneth Branagh as Poirot. I respect Kenneth Branagh as an actor and some of the filmmaker, but a lot of times Kenneth Branagh gets in the way of being Kenneth Branagh. So now you have him still fit and trim with this big walrus mustache. Poirot would have been disgusted by that mustache. You want to stick yourself in being Poirot? Okay, put on a little padding, maybe a little thing here to kind of poof this out. You want to do that? Okay. John Malkovich, I haven't seen that either, but he's not Poirot either. Especially if you're not going to do, then do something else. So I think that's where my frustration with some of the stuff with his Dark Materials is. If you're going to make changes and you're going to do all this other stuff, if you're going to make something that feels different, then do something else. If you're going to, we love and respect the material, then do something about the material. So I'm looking forward to the further seasons, and like I said, I do hope they make the other books into the seasons and stuff like that. But I hope they can kind of pull back a little bit and get back into the feeling of the books, and even the feeling that the movie had a little bit, and kind of tweak the characters to be a little bit more accurate to where the characters should be, instead of these almost completely different people. Like Lee Scoresby and Ma Costa were some of my favorite people from the books, and they were almost unrecognizable in the show. Again, well acted, but unrecognizable to what they were in the books, and even what they were in the other movie. So, stop, please. Stop it, baby. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, I feel wishy-washy about my opinion on the show, because again, there was stuff that was well done. Technically speaking, there was stuff that was well done. If you can remove yourself from it and just watch the damn show, then there was stuff that was well done. It was a pretty good show. There were some continuity, some editing stuff that was kind of like, what's the point of that? So there's some technical little fuzziness on with that too, but it's like the one friend of mine was talking when Game of Thrones ended. It was the last couple episodes, and we were pissed off about how bad they were in the character assassination. And his point was, if you just watched, especially with Daenerys practically nuking King's Landing, if you just watched that as the movie in and of itself, and my response is, oh fuck yeah, that would have been amazing. It would have just been awesome. Like this gorgeous woman on this badass dragon just tearing a town apart with that. Yeah, that'd have been awesome. But I didn't divorce myself from the books enough, and there had already so many different changes. And Game of Thrones, an excellent example of, if you think you're better than the source material, shut the fuck up, sit down, and make something new. Don't hang on to someone else's coattails, but still think you're better than them, Dan and Dave, because you're not. Um, so I tried going with that in mind, and again, just with the blinders of just watch the show of the show's own merits. Then his Dark Materials is a good show. It is. There's a lot of stuff that makes sense if you're making television. Decisions they make, again, some editing, some other things that were a little jarring, a little confusing. But as a show on its own merits, pretty good. In terms of any sort of expectation we might have had as fans of the books. Um, Honestly, kind of disappointing. Um, there's some stuff that, I mean, but I mean, there's some stuff that made me laugh. When Lyra was really kind of allowed to be Lyra, and some of the stuff she would just spit back out in terms of what she said, it was pretty damn funny. Her interactions. There was a few scenes there towards the end where she's, getting to interact more with Lord Asriel and everything. That it was like this little, like, this young woman was really holding her own with the seasoned professionals with that, and even with was it James Cosmo, who's been in 20 billion different things, from Braveheart and Troy, and um, yeah, all Game of Thrones and all this other stuff like that. Um, really annoyed at whatever the hell is in my damn eye right now. Um, this is allergies. I ran out of local honey, so it might be allergies. All right, non sequitur. Um, and even Lin-Manuel Miranda, again, seasoned professional in a lot of different ways. You could tell he was really in the character. He was really kind of having fun with it, and this girl was like dead on involved with it too, and really holding her own with it. So like she did a really good job with it, and there was some, and when it was accurate to the books and everything like that, it was real nice. Um, so yeah, it's sort of like again, I feel really wishy-washy about the review. It feels really sort of here or there. It feels kind of, I liked it and I didn't, and I understand it and I don't. I'm almost confused by it in some way, and I just finished it today, so maybe I need to sit with it and everything, and maybe I can go off for another hour about some addendum if I stew about it for a while or something else like that. But as it stands now, it is worth watching. It is worth watching maybe a little more if you've never read the books. Uh, Probably better if you haven't seen the movie either. If you're not familiar with his Dark Materials, Golden Compass, or Northern Lights, I think the original sort of title for book one was, or any of this other stuff, um, it's probably going to end up being like, holy shit, this is a really cool show. There's a lot of neat stuff. Cool. Maybe I see what you mean about the editing, but overall, really cool. If, your only exposure is the movie, this is going to be very different, and still probably might come out but like, oh no, that was really good. If you read the books, however, you might be disappointed by it. Because again, there's a couple scenes that seem poignant they didn't do. Some stuff seemed really rushed. Other things, editing was weird. And again, the feeling wasn't there. And just the characterizations of sort of main people wasn't accurate. It was almost completely different people. So again, maybe I'll feel differently if I watch it again. Maybe I'll feel differently if, in through latter seasons. Maybe I'll feel differently if I go back and I reread the books and have it more fresh on my mind to kind of compare. All those things are possible. The thing about reading the books giving me more of a kind of an uptick in my feeling of the show is not, however, probable. Having the show kind of realign maybe with the books or feel differently in the latter seasons, that might make me kind of boost my opinion up. And the first season was good, but it got better. Maybe something along those lines. So either way, I think worth watching. Just if you're a fan of the books, just beware that this is going to be different. It is almost like if you're a fan of Sherlock Holmes, the stories, the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stories, um, and then you watch the Stephen Moffat, Mark Gatiss Sherlock, don't expect the stories in that show. Just take it as a show on its own. So if you're a fan of the books and you can take the show on its own, you'll probably enjoy it more. So that's my absolutely no help, wishy-washy, confused review of HBO's His Dark Materials season 1. So I have more random reviews and nonsense on here as in addition to the sort of flip side of things on my channel of the different internal martial arts sort of instruction and talks about different stuff like that. few demos, so a couple things about the animals, which is nice. And I have a couple other things of some sort of weird experience things I need to put up as well. I filmed a while ago, but just haven't put up. So please like, subscribe, share this, that, the other, and thanks for watching.